The anthill was, as it appeared to me at this point, an enormous hill, or perhaps mountain, of enormous boulder-like grains of orange sand piled up from bottom to top. The sky behind it was that of enormous blades of pen and pencil grass, and above that the blue sky was vaguely distinguishable. I began to take steps towards the anthill, and Kleiper shouted in a whisper, "Stop!" I turned around and looked at him, and found that his cheeks appeared to be red with embarrassment. "Sorry, I mixed up my punctuation. Anyways, you can't just go barging into an anthill. Do you know what ants are like?" "No." "Well, they're very cordial, and you can't just show up without an invitation or some sort of formal introduction. After all, why would a creature that is so formal as to march all over the world in lines be so brutish in having company?" At that moment, Kleiper jumped out and in a voice that was nothing like his normal speaking voice announced, "The royal prince of his realm of origin, Sir John." Hearing my name, I stepped forward and stood in the light as countless ants flowed out of the anthill, and began to applaud in a very loud yet mannered fashion. At that moment, however, I saw that these were no ordinary ants. It appeared that they had faces on the backs of what I had traditionally thought of as an ant's backside, and that their ant bodies were, more or less, giant hats. They were like little men walking around with big ant hats on, little men who were directing the actions of the legs of the hats through some unknown process. "And to what," began one ant in a very loud voice as he approached us, "do we owe this honor of having such a distinguished guest? It isn't often that we receive visitors from origin here in Streel, especially at our anthill." "He has come to strike down the Freel," proclaimed Kleiper. The clapping resumed, and once it had quieted, the ant spoke again, saying, "Bravo, bravo! But that task will be slightly more difficult now that the Freel has become a Freel." "What?" I shouted in frustration. "Well, didn't you hear the difference? It's becoming much more dangerous and much different. By the time you reach him, you'll be in need of the help of Topher." "Who's Topher?" I shouted, leaving behind any and all inhibitions as I waited for this dream to finally fade to an end. The crowd shuddered and gasped as I spurted out this question, and Kleiper threw a paw over my mouth. The ants suddenly became angry, and Kleiper shouted, "He's new here! He doesn't know yet!" The ants settled a bit, and a moment later Kleiper resumed speaking, saying, "We have come to get a shried so that this young man can begin to go about defeating the Freel. Please, you have to help." The ants seemed to be discussing amongst themselves the validity of helping us, or what would seem to have been help. And a moment later, without much sound at all, a single ant emerged from the hill, carrying a shard of glass on which was placed a single seed. "Here you are, sir," said the ant, toting the seed on the glass tray. "Take the shreed and plant it in fertile soil. Add no more than 2 tears to water it, and make sure it is covered with plenty of dry paperweight." "Paperweight?" I asked in confusion. I heard another gasp from the ants, and suddenly the eyes of the ant carrying the seed turned red as he sputtered out the words, "How rude!" I noticed his triple punctuation this time. The ants all began to move towards me, with angry red eyes, swarming towards me like an army coming up a hill, and looking at Kleiper, I began to panic. 2 ants came, grabbed me by either arm, and began to carry me towards the anthill as I shouted, "Kleiper, help!" "No good! This is just no good!" declared one ant. "A disgrace!" proclaimed another. I felt their marching paces as they dragged me up the anthill, their feet sinking into the orangish sand a little with every step. I screamed, "Let me go!" over and over, but to no avail, and as they dragged me down into the dark, cavernous inside of the anthill, I saw a strange sight. There sat the queen ant on her throne, which was nothing more than 2 pennies, one propped against the wall and one laid flat on the floor. The queen was a relatively plain-looking ant, with a slightly human face behind her pincer mouth. Her eyes, in particular, seemed to display some sort of understanding that was something more sentient than that of the other ants. What's more, is that the queen's head was adorned by a small mountain of crumbs, and her feet were swollen like gourds. Not wishing to say anything further to anger the ants, I sat and listened to what was to happen now. The dark interior of the anthill was quiet. And suddenly the Queen spoke. I have been going to speak for a very long time, and am now still going to speak in the future. Therefore, my words will not be of now so much as later, but heed them none the less. This child will always be an is, until the day when the clay makes him a will be. And so we must have let him go a while ago, so we will not anger Topher tomorrow, the day after, or in a million tomorrows in the future. I suddenly felt the urge to turn to Clyper and ask what just happened, but held my tongue. End of chapter 3. Where is John going? What is to come of the Shreed? Why were the ants so offended by John's question? Stay tuned to find out.